There's a reason I don't drive alone at night anymore, especially on the back roads outside Seattle. And after what happened last November, I honestly don't think I ever will again. I used to love late night drives. The roads always felt different after midnight. Quieter, empty, like the whole world had gone to sleep. Just endless forest, cold rain hitting the windshield, and the sound of tires moving across wet pavement. Back then, it actually felt peaceful. That night started completely normal. I had spent the weekend visiting an old friend near Olympia. We watched movies, talked for hours, drank way too much coffee. Just normal stuff. I originally planned on leaving before dark, but we completely lost track of time. By the time I finally got on the road, it was already close to midnight. The weather was terrible too. Not a full storm or anything, but freezing rain kept slamming against the windshield hard enough that I had to keep the wipers on high almost the entire drive. For the first hour, everything felt normal. I was driving north on Interstate 5. There were still cars around me, gas stations every few miles, streetlights, traffic, nothing felt wrong. But near Tacoma, my GPS suddenly rerouted me. There was construction ahead, so it directed me off the highway onto a different route. Normally, I never take unknown roads that late at night. But honestly, I was exhausted, and I just wanted to get home. So I followed the route. About 15 minutes later, I realized I hadn't seen another car in a while. The road had narrowed into 2 lanes with nothing around me except trees. Tall, dark pine trees on both sides of the road. No houses, no streetlights, nothing. Just my headlights, the rain, and darkness. I remember trying to turn on a local Seattle radio station just to make the drive feel less empty, but the signal kept cutting out. Static. Half of a song. Then silence again. For a while, nothing happened. And honestly, I started feeling stupid for being nervous in the first place. Then I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I actually felt relieved. At least I wasn't completely alone out there anymore. The car stayed pretty far back, far enough that I couldn't make out the model. Just headlights. But after a few minutes, something started feeling off. The distance never changed, not even once. The headlights stayed in the exact same position behind me the entire time. And what made it worse was that I hadn't been driving at a consistent speed at all. Sometimes I slowed down because of the rain, sometimes I sped up, but every single time, those headlights adjusted perfectly, always staying the same distance behind me. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I kept telling myself it was probably nothing, just another driver heading the same direction. But deep down, I knew something felt wrong. Eventually, I saw a gas station up ahead, a small, isolated station sitting completely alone off the road. There was an old, flickering neon sign above it that read, "Riverbend Gas." The place looked almost abandoned, but I needed coffee badly, and honestly, I wanted to be around other people for a minute, so I pulled in. Almost immediately, the car behind me pulled into the station too, but it stopped several spaces away from me. Its headlights stayed on, pointed directly at my car. That was the first moment I genuinely felt afraid. I tried looking through my mirror, but between the rain and the glare from the headlights, I couldn't see anything inside the vehicle. So I quickly got out and walked into the station. There was only one employee inside, an older man sitting behind the counter. The place was completely silent. So silent. I could hear the refrigerators humming near the back wall. I grabbed a coffee, then casually glanced back out the front window. The car was still there, headlights still on. Then, slowly, The driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, thin, wearing a black rain jacket. He just stood there in the rain, not moving, staring toward the gas station. But he never came inside. I looked away immediately, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe he was just tired too. But then the older man behind the counter suddenly asked, "Is that guy with you?" I looked at him and said, "No." The man behind the counter stared out the window for a few seconds, then quietly said, "You shouldn't stay here too long." The second he said that, my stomach dropped. I don't even know why. Something about the way he said it felt wrong, like he already knew something I didn't. I paid for the coffee, walked quickly back to my car, locked the doors immediately and pulled back onto the road. And almost instantly, the other car pulled out behind me too. That's when the panic really started setting in. I pressed harder on the gas. The car behind me sped up too. I made a sudden turn onto another road, and a few seconds later the headlights turned with me. Now my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. The road ahead was completely empty. No traffic, no houses, no lights, just endless forest, rain, and those headlights behind me. Then suddenly, my GPS signal disappeared. The screen froze for a second, then went black at almost the exact same moment. My phone lost service too. No bars, nothing. And then the car behind me turned on its high beams. The light flooded through every mirror in my car, so bright I could barely see the road anymore. I panicked. I pushed the speed higher, 70, 80, 90. But no matter how fast I drove, the car stayed right behind me, always the same distance away. Then something appeared in the road ahead. A person, standing directly in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded hard across the wet pavement before finally stopping. And the figure never moved, just standing there in the rain, completely still. I couldn't make out the face clearly, but I could tell they were staring directly at me. Then, for just a second, I looked into my rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. The car behind me was gone, completely gone. No headlights, no engine, nothing. The road behind me was empty. I immediately looked back toward the figure standing ahead of me, and it was gone too. Just rain, darkness, and an empty road. I didn't stop driving again after that, not once. I drove almost non-stop until I finally made it back to Seattle around 4 in the morning. But the strangest part happened the next day. I checked my GPS history trying to figure out where I had been that night. But the route didn't exist. Not the road, not the turnoff, not even the gas station. I searched the entire area online multiple times. There was nothing there except forest. No business records, no photos, nothing called Riverbend gas, nothing. And to this day, I still have no explanation for what happened that night. But there's one thing I still remember clearly. Right before I left that gas station, I caught a quick glimpse of the man's face in my rearview mirror. And he wasn't looking at me. He was smiling. This happened last October, and honestly, I still haven't fully processed what happened that night. I've only told a few people about this story because if I hadn't experienced it myself, I probably wouldn't believe it either. At the time I was living in Portland, Oregon. I had a small apartment near downtown, and I worked closing shifts at a grocery store a few nights a week. Most nights I got off work around 11 p.m, and since my apartment wasn't too far away, I usually walked home. Normally the route felt pretty safe. The streets were usually quiet, a few people here and there, nothing unusual. But that night, something felt different. The weather had been cold all day, and by the evening a heavy fog had started settling over the streets. By the time we finished closing the store, it was around 11:30. When I stepped outside, the city already felt empty. I could hear distant traffic somewhere far off, but the streets near me were almost completely silent. I put on my hoodie, plugged in my headphones, and started walking home like usual. At first, everything seemed normal. I took the same route I always did. But about 10 minutes into the walk, I started feeling like someone was behind me. At first, I ignored it. People walk around late at night all the time in Portland. But after a few more seconds, I realized the footsteps behind me were matching my pace perfectly. When I slowed down, the footsteps slowed down too. When I walked faster, they sped up. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. I casually glanced behind me. There was a man walking there. Black hoodie, hands in his pockets. And because the streetlights were so dim, I couldn't really make out his face clearly. But I could tell he was looking directly at me. I immediately looked forward again and kept walking. I kept trying to convince myself I was overthinking things. But then, the next time I looked back, he was closer. Close enough now that I could hear every step clearly. Tap, tap, tap. The streets around us were almost completely empty, and suddenly I realized my headphones were still playing music. I immediately pulled them out. Now the only sounds were my footsteps and his. I pulled out my phone and pretended like I was calling somebody. But honestly, my hands were shaking. I started walking faster. Now I was almost speed walking, but the footsteps behind me stayed the exact same distance away. Not closer, not farther, just constantly behind me. Then suddenly, I noticed the next block ahead had no streetlights on at all. The entire block was dark. And unfortunately, that was the shortest route home. I slowed down for a second, and almost immediately, the footsteps behind me stopped too. The entire street went silent. Dead silent. I slowly looked back. The man was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, completely motionless, just staring at me. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then slowly, he started walking toward me again. That was the moment panic fully hit me. Every instinct in my body told me to run, so I did. I took off sprinting into the dark block ahead, and a second later, I heard the footsteps behind me speed up too. Now he was running. I was sprinting as fast as I could. My breathing was breaking apart. I didn't dare look behind me. Then suddenly, I saw a laundromat up ahead with lights still on inside. I practically threw myself through the front door. Inside, there was only an older woman sitting near the back reading a magazine. I immediately turned around and looked through the glass doors. The street outside was empty. Completely empty. The man was gone. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. I stood there for a minute trying to catch my breath. Then the older woman quietly asked, "Did someone follow you?" The second she said that, I felt cold all over again. I looked at her and asked, "What?" She kept staring out the window for a few seconds before speaking again. "You're not the first person." I didn't understand what she meant. Then she explained that over the past few months, multiple people had come into that laundromat late at night, saying they'd seen a man following them along the same street. Always the same description. Black hoodie, walking slowly behind them, then suddenly disappearing. I nervously asked, "Did anyone call the police?" The woman gave a small laugh. Then she said, "The police checked the security cameras." And after a short pause, she looked back at me and quietly said, "They never found anybody in the footage." At that moment, I felt my stomach completely drop. I stopped walking immediately. It honestly felt like my breathing froze in my chest, because now the footsteps behind me sounded like two different people. One heavier, one lighter, and somehow that made the situation feel even worse. But the scariest part was this. I didn't have the courage to look behind me, because at that moment I had this overwhelming feeling that if I turned around, I was going to see something I'd never be able to forget. I started walking faster, then faster, until I was almost running, but the footsteps behind me sped up too. Now they sounded extremely close, so close, like somebody was walking right behind me. The street around me was completely empty. No cars, no people, nothing, just the cold air and those footsteps. Then suddenly, my phone screen turned on by itself. No notification, no call. The camera app had opened on its own. I looked down at my phone, and the second I did, my entire body went numb. The front camera was on, and behind me, the street behind me was visible through the camera, but there was nobody there. The street was empty, completely empty, and yet, the footsteps were still getting closer. I immediately shut my phone off. At that point, I was practically running. My apartment was only 2 blocks away now, but then suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Completely. The entire street went dead silent again. So silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. I slowly came to a stop, and just stood there for a few seconds trying to breathe. Then finally, I forced myself to look behind me. The street was empty. Totally empty. And honestly, for a second I felt relieved. I started convincing myself maybe I really was just panicking. But then, I noticed somebody standing across the street. A man, black hoodie, head lowered, completely motionless. He wasn't moving at all. Half of his body was hidden in the darkness. I completely froze. Then slowly, he lifted his head. But because of the distance and the poor lighting, I still couldn't make out his face clearly. And honestly, maybe that was a good thing. Because at that exact moment, somebody whispered directly behind me, "Don't look at him." The fear that hit me in that moment honestly felt electric. I spun around immediately, but there was nobody there, just an empty sidewalk. At that point, my mind was in full panic mode. I ran straight toward my apartment without looking back again. I practically jumped up the stairs, unlocked my door, and locked it again the second I got inside. My breathing was completely falling apart. I stood there against the door for a few seconds trying to calm down. Then slowly, I walked over to the window and looked down at the street below. The man was still standing there. Exact same spot. Motionless. Looking up toward my building, I immediately shut the curtains. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the living room lights on until morning and checked the window over and over again. But by sunrise, he was gone. The next day, I tried convincing myself it was all stress, lack of sleep, overthinking. But 3 days later, something happened that completely changed everything. I had just gotten home from work and was checking my mailbox. Mixed in with the normal mail, there was a folded piece of paper. My name was written on it. Just my first name, no address, no stamp. I brought it upstairs to my apartment and opened it. Inside, there was only one sentence written on the paper. You looked back. The second I read that, it honestly felt like all the blood drained out of my body. After that night, I never used that route again. A few months later, I moved out of that apartment too. But the most disturbing part is this. About a month ago, I was working another night shift at the grocery store. We were only a few minutes from closing, and then the automatic doors opened. A man walked inside, black hoodie, head lowered. He slowly walked into the store, and then stopped in the middle of the aisle without saying a word. And instantly, my entire body went cold. I tried to get a look at his face, but at that exact moment, the store lights flickered for a second. And when the lights came back on, the man was gone, completely gone. There was nobody anywhere in the store, but before disappearing, he had left muddy footprints behind. From the entrance, all the way to the spot directly behind where I had been standing. After we closed the store that night, I decided to check the security footage. Honestly, I needed to prove to myself that I was just overreacting, so I rewound the footage. The automatic doors opened. I could see myself walking into the store. Then a few seconds later, I was standing in the middle of the aisle, like I was staring at somebody, but there was nobody else there. No man, no black hoodie, nothing. In the footage, I was completely alone. But that wasn't even the most disturbing part. When I looked closer at the video, I noticed muddy footprints slowly appearing on the floor behind me, one at a time, like something invisible was walking up behind me. And then, the footprints stopped, directly behind me.